I sat across from Emily in the restaurant, watching as she absent-mindedly sipped her wine, that familiar little smirk playing on her lips, the one she always had when lost in thought. I liked to believe it meant she was content, that she was enjoying the evening. But deep down, something felt off. It had felt that way for a long time. The waiter had just cleared our plates when I reached into my pocket and slid a small, neatly wrapped box across the table. "Happy anniversary," I said, my pulse quickening as I waited for her reaction. I had spent weeks picking out something special, a delicate bracelet adorned with a charm representing the place where we had first met. Maybe it was a little sentimental, even cheesy, but it held meaning. Emily barely spared the box a glance before letting out a sharp, amused chuckle. It wasn't a laugh of joy or surprise, it was something else. Something that sent an uneasy chill up my spine. "Oh, wow," she said, drawing out the words as she picked up the box between two fingers as though it were some kind of joke. "You really went all out, huh?" I blinked. "What?" She shook her head, still smiling, but there was something cold beneath it. "No, it's just... I don't know. It's cute. Really cute." She unwrapped the box carelessly, letting the paper flutter onto the table, and popped it open. The bracelet shimmered in the dim restaurant lighting. Emily barely looked at it before snapping the box shut. "Adorable," she said, her tone flat. Something inside me twisted. "You don't like it?" Emily exhaled softly through her nose and took another sip of her wine, offering only a shrug. "It's just not really my style, you know? But it's sweet that you tried." She didn't even pretend to appreciate it. Didn't bother to put it on. Instead, she simply set the box down and reached for her phone, flipping it over to check the screen. And that's when I saw it. For just a split second, before she tilted the phone away, I caught a glimpse of a message notification. Only a few words. Not enough to tell the whole story, but more than enough to gut me. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." The blood drained from my face. My mouth went dry. I wasn't sure if I had truly seen it or if my mind was filling in gaps where it shouldn't. But my instincts had already made the decision for me. Emily, completely unaware of my sudden silence, picked up the card I had left beside her plate. "Let's see what kind of sappy nonsense you wrote this time," she teased, unfolding it. She started reading. And in that moment, everything changed. The playful smirk vanished the second her eyes scanned the first few lines. She stiffened, her fingers clenching the card so tightly that I half expected it to tear. Her breath hitched. Silence. The world around us faded. The low murmur of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the soft music playing in the background, none of it mattered anymore. Because she was just now realizing that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. And she was about to find out exactly why. Her eyes darted across the words, her fingers gripping the edges as if trying to steady herself. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. The color drained from her face, the smug amusement from moments ago evaporating as though it had never been there. I leaned back in my chair, watching her unravel. I had spent weeks perfecting that message, carefully choosing each word. It started out like any anniversary card, sweet, nostalgic, full of love. But halfway through, the tone shifted. "I know about him, Emily." She blinked rapidly, her throat tightening as she swallowed hard. "I know where you were last night. I know what you did. I know who you did it with." Her hands trembled, crinkling the paper. A shaky breath escaped her lips. I could see the panic flickering behind her eyes, her mind scrambling for an excuse, a lie, anything that might get her out of this. Finally, she let out a short, brittle laugh. "Is this some kind of joke?" I didn't answer. I let the weight of silence press down on her. She licked her lips, setting the card down carefully as if it might detonate in her hands. "Okay," she said, her voice light, too light. "Whatever this is, it's ridiculous." She reached for her wine again, but her fingers were unsteady. "You don't look like you think it's ridiculous," I said. Her nostrils flared. "Because it is. You're being paranoid." I tilted my head. "Am I?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Yeah. I mean, do you hear yourself? I know where you were last night. Seriously." She forced another laugh, but it cracked around the edges. "This is insane. What is this, some kind of what? Do you think I have a secret life or something?" I didn't respond. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Emily's entire body tensed. "Here's the fun part," I said, unlocking my screen. "You don't have to explain anything to me because I already know everything." Her breath caught as I tapped the screen a few times. Then, without a word, I turned the phone around and placed it on the table in front of her. She looked down. And then she shattered. The screen was filled with proof, screenshots, messages, photos, timestamps, locations. All of it. She sat motionless, barely breathing, her eyes locked onto the undeniable reality in front of her. For a moment, she tried to speak, but her voice cracked, betraying her. She swallowed hard before forcing out the question, where did you get this? I let the silence stretch between us before responding. Does it really matter? Emily sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers curling into tight fists on her lap. Then, just like that, the initial shock, guilt, and fear drained from her expression, replaced by something far more dangerous, anger. Not at herself, but at me. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling deeply as if pulling herself together. When she opened them again, her gaze was hardened, filled with fury. You went through my things, she accused, her voice sharp. I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's your response to this? Her lips pressed into a tight line. I can't believe this. You actually, she exhaled sharply, shaking her head, her eyes darting around as though looking for someone to confirm her outrage. Do you even hear yourself? Do you realize how unhinged this makes you look? I remained calm, my voice steady. You're the one involved with someone else, and yet I'm the one who's crazy? She scoffed, her breath coming out in a sharp exhale. It's not what you think. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? Then by all means, enlighten me. I'd love to hear your explanation. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, uncertainty, but she masked it quickly. Sitting up straighter, she smoothed the napkin on her lap, regaining her composure. Then she looked me directly in the eyes and said, it doesn't mean anything. This time I laughed an actual laugh, filled with disbelief. That's the best you've got? Her jaw tightened. You're blowing this out of proportion. Without a word, I picked up my phone and scrolled to one of the photos. Then, turning the screen toward her, I let her see. There she was, standing in a dimly lit hotel hallway wearing the same dress she had left in, saying she was only going for drinks. A man's arm draped around her waist. Their faces close. I tapped the screen. The next image loaded, a time-stamped photo of the two of them stepping into a hotel room together. I watched as her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. Then, leaning forward, I lowered my voice just enough to ensure she heard every word. Say it again, I challenged. Tell me how it doesn't mean anything. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her dress. Her gaze flickered to the side, her jaw clenching. And then she said something I never expected. So what? I froze. She shrugged, her expression turning cold, detached. So what if I did? Are you really that surprised? Something inside me shifted. At that moment it hit me she wasn't remorseful. Not even a little. I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle like a crushing force against my chest. That was her response? No justifications, no apologies. Just an indifferent so what? Something in me cracked. For a moment, I just sat there, studying the woman I had spent the last 10 years of my life with, the woman I had loved, defended, sacrificed for. And there she was, sitting across from me, shoulders squared, chin lifted, looking at me as though she were the one who had been wronged. As if I was the one who had betrayed her. I exhaled slowly, pressing my tongue against the inside of my cheek. That's it? My voice was quiet, measured. That's all you have to say? Emily rolled her eyes. Oh, don't act so shocked. What did you expect? That I beg for your forgiveness? She let out a bitter laugh. God, you're so dramatic. That word dramatic echoed in my head, rattling around like some cruel joke. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. She had no shame. No regret. Just contempt. And suddenly I saw everything so clearly, the way she had been treating me for months. Like I was nothing more than an afterthought, a mere backdrop in her life. And now I finally understood why. Leaning back in my chair, I tilted my head, letting out a slow, humorless chuckle. You really don't feel bad at all, do you? Emily sighed, exasperated, as if she were speaking to a child throwing a tantrum. Look, she said, shifting in her seat. I don't know what you want from me. Do you want an apology? Fine. She sighed again, rolling her eyes. I'm sorry. The words came out flat, like she was reading a grocery list. There. Happy? I just stared at her. She scoffed, tossing her napkin onto the table. Jesus. You were so exhausting. That word exhausting hit differently. I didn't know why, but it did. I had spent years trying to be the best husband I could be. Supporting her. Loving her. Standing by her through everything. And now, after she had thrown all of it away, I was the exhausting one? A slow, simmering anger burned inside me. I picked up my glass of water, rolling it between my fingers before setting it down carefully. Then I nodded. All right. Emily blinked. What? All right, I repeated. You win. I stood up, smoothing out my shirt. Enjoy your night, Emily. Her eyes narrowed. Where are you going? Reaching into my wallet, I pulled out a few bills and dropped them onto the table. Anywhere but here. She scoffed, shaking her head. Oh, come on. Don't be childish. I ignored her. As I turned, I strode purposefully, pushing past the restaurant doors and stepping into the crisp night air. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. If she truly believed I would just walk away quietly, she was in for a rude awakening. I exited the restaurant with my pulse hammering and thoughts racing. The cool breeze met my face, but it did nothing to quench the fire burning inside me. Her voice still echoed in my head, that dismissive scoff, the casual way she had tossed out those words, "So what?" As if our years together, our marriage, everything I had sacrificed for her meant absolutely nothing. Fine. If she wanted to act like it was all meaningless, like she felt no remorse, then let's see how she reacts when I stop playing the fool. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through my messages until I found the conversation I was searching for. The thread with someone she never would have expected. Someone she had no clue I had been in contact with. I tapped the screen. Send. The response came almost instantly. My phone vibrated in my hand. "Where are you? Let's talk." A slow smirk formed as I slid the phone back into my pocket. "Oh, we were definitely going to talk." 15 minutes later, I was parked outside an upscale apartment complex on the opposite side of town, the kind of place with private parking garages and a pristine lobby adorned with fresh-cut flowers. I already knew whose name was on the lease. The entrance door swung open, and there he was. Jason. Tall, well-groomed, effortlessly confident, the kind of man people instinctively trusted. He stepped out, scanning the lot before his gaze locked onto me. His expression remained unreadable, though his cautious steps toward my car betrayed his uncertainty. I rolled down the window. "Get in." Jason hesitated, his eyes darting around as if expecting some kind of ambush. After a moment, he exhaled sharply and opened the door, sliding into the passenger seat. A thick silence settled between us. In the distance, the hum of traffic and the faint bass from a passing car filled the space between words neither of us had spoken yet. Jason ran a hand through his hair before sighing. "Look, Manda." I lifted a hand, cutting him off. "Don't." His mouth snapped shut. I turned to face him fully, taking in the man sitting beside me. This was him. The one she had chosen. The one she had lied for, laughed with behind my back. The one she had been sneaking around with. Jason shifted, uncomfortable under my gaze. "How long?" I asked finally, my voice even. His fingers drummed against his knee. He exhaled. "A few months." I nodded slowly, the words settling in my chest. "And you knew she was married?" His jaw tightened. "Yeah. I let that hang between us." He cleared his throat, looking away. "Look, I'm not proud of it, all right?" I didn't. He shook his head, frustration evident. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." A hollow laugh escaped me. "Oh, so it just happened?" Jason rubbed his forehead. "I don't know what to tell you, man." He stopped himself, pressing his lips together. I leaned back against my seat, gazing at the distant glow of the streetlights. Then, after a moment, I spoke. "She doesn't love you, you know?" Jason tensed. I turned to him, meeting his eyes. "She told me it didn't mean anything." "That's what you were to her?" His expression hardened. There was something flickering behind his gaze, anger, maybe, or realization finally settling in. "I thought you should know," I continued. "Before you start thinking she's going to leave me for you. Before you convince yourself you're special." I let out a sharp breath. "You're not. You're just a distraction. A game she's playing. And when she gets bored, she'll move on. Just like she did to me." Jason swallowed, his throat working around the weight of my words. He looked away, turning his focus to the window as if he could pretend none of this was real. But it was. And we both knew it. The silence stretched between us. Finally, I reached for the door handle. "We're done here." Jason didn't argue. He just gave a single nod, his jaw locked tight. I stepped out, slamming the door behind me. But I wasn't finished. Emily thought she could betray me and walk away like nothing had happened? She was about to understand exactly what felt like. I didn't go home. Not yet. There was still something left to do. She believed she had the upper hand. That she could laugh in my face, toss aside everything we had built, and walk away without facing the consequences. She thought I was weak. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I drove in silence, the city lights blurring past my windshield. My pulse was steady, my hands relaxed on the wheel. It was strange, almost eerie, how calm I felt. Maybe because for the first time in months, maybe even years, I wasn't lost in confusion. I wasn't second-guessing myself. I wasn't making excuses for her. I knew exactly what needed to be done. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the clock had long passed midnight. The house loomed in the darkness, its outline familiar yet distant. A faint glow flickered from the upstairs bedroom window. She was home. Good. I stepped out of the car, my movements deliberate, unwavering. I walked up to the front door with a certainty I hadn't felt in ages. No hesitation. No doubt. I stepped inside. Emily lay in bed, propped against the pillows, her phone in hand. The moment her eyes landed on me, she swiftly locked the screen and placed it on the nightstand. Her face remained unreadable, yet a flicker of something passed through her gaze. Was it relief? Guilt? Annoyance? "You're back," she stated in a carefully neutral tone. I didn't respond. Instead, I just stood there, watching her. She let out a slow breath, shifting slightly under the covers. "Are you done with the dramatics?" That made me smile. She had no idea. Without a word, I crossed the room to the dresser, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a stack of papers I had placed there earlier that morning. Turning back to face her, I let the documents dangle loosely from my fingers, meeting her gaze head-on. Her eyes narrowed. "What's that?" Rather than answer, I tossed them onto the bed. Emily hesitated before reaching for the papers. As she flipped through them, her brow furrowed deeper with each page, until she reached the final one. That was when I saw it, the exact moment realization dawned. A divorce petition. Her head snapped up. "You're joking." I remained still. "Sign them." She let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it, only disbelief. "Oh, come on. You can't be serious." Silence. Her smirk wavered. "You're really going through with this?" "You made your choice, Emily," I said evenly. "Now I'm making mine." She scoffed, tossing the papers onto the bed as if they were something tainted. "Please. You're not leaving me." The arrogance. The absolute certainty that I'd never have the courage to walk away. I smiled. "Watch me." Her expression darkened. "And what, you think you're going to win? You think you'll come out of this looking like the good guy?" I shrugged. "I don't need to win. I just need to be done." For a moment, she just stared at me, her jaw clenched, her breath short and measured. Then, just when I thought she might lash out, she did something I should have anticipated but still caught me off guard. She switched tactics. Her expression softened. Her shoulders slumped as if the weight of the situation had finally pressed down on her. She let out a quiet, trembling sigh, her voice lowering to something gentle, something almost remorseful. "Babe," she whispered, her tone laced with a kind of fragility, "don't do this." I nearly laughed. There it was. When cruelty didn't work, she resorted to manipulation. Classic Emily. I tilted my head. "And why not?" She hesitated. Then, with practiced slowness, she reached across the bed, placing her hand lightly over mine. Her fingers curled around my wrist, warm, familiar. I felt nothing. "We can fix this," she murmured. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But don't you think we owe it to ourselves to at least try?" My gaze dropped to her hand, then back to her face, those same eyes I once would have done anything for. I smiled. "Sign the papers, Emily." Her grip tightened. The mask slipped. "And if I don't?" I pulled my hand away. "Then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." Her expression twisted. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I replied, my voice calm. "I'm giving you options." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She knew. She knew I wasn't bluffing. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was the one holding the power. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. "You have until the end of the week." Then I left, leaving her alone in the silence she had so often left me in. She had spent months making me feel small. Now it was her turn. The next morning, I woke up feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Clarity. Emily wasn't beside me. The house was still, yet I knew she hadn't left. She was here somewhere, probably sulking, probably strategizing her next move. I didn't care. Getting up, I dressed, made myself a cup of coffee, and settled at the kitchen table, letting the quiet settle around me. Funny. This place had never felt more like mine than it did in that moment. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard her. Soft footsteps. A brief pause. Then she entered the kitchen. Arms crossed. Expression unreadable. She had changed into yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, the effortless, casual look. The "I'm completely unbothered" facade. "Morning," she greeted as if nothing had happened. I took a slow sip of coffee, offering no reply. Emily exhaled, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "So, what, you're just going to pretend I don't exist now?" I set my mug down and finally met her gaze. "Did you sign the papers?" Her jaw tightened. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair. "We talked last night." She let out a sharp breath. "No. You talked. You threw a tantrum, stormed off, and now you think you can just end this? Just like that." Tilting my head, I studied her. She still didn't get it. Still thought she had the upper hand. I smiled. "That's exactly what I think." Her nostrils flared. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath before raising her voice. "You're not even willing to try?" A quiet chuckle escaped me. "Try what, Emily? Being dismissed for another few years?" I shook my head. "No thanks." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, so you're perfect? Like you never made mistakes in this marriage?" My smile widened. Funny. I don't recall being unfaithful. Her mouth snapped shut. Jaw clenched. Fists tight at her sides. She looked away. Got her. I picked up my coffee again, my grip steady, my patience thin. If you're not here to sign, then we have nothing to discuss. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep, measured breath. When she finally turned back to face me, I could already see the shift in her demeanor. I knew what was coming before she even spoke. You're not getting the house, she said smoothly. Or the car. Or a laugh escaped me, genuine, amused. Ah, there she is. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Still smiling, I shook my head. You can drop the act. I knew it was only a matter of time before we got to the real issue. I gestured lazily around the kitchen. Your things. Her jaw tensed. I helped build this life too. I shrugged. And now you get to build a new one with Jason. Her expression darkened. I never said I was leaving you for him. I raised an eyebrow. That's adorable. You think you have a choice. Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm, almost gentle. You didn't just cheat, Emily. You humiliated me. You made me a joke. And now you think you get to decide how this ends. She swallowed hard, shifting her weight as if searching for an escape. I leaned back, stretching out my arms. But hey, maybe you're right. Maybe we should stay together. I tapped my chin, pretending to consider it. Just imagine the dinner parties. Our friends knowing. My family, your family, everyone looking at you, knowing exactly what you did. I let out a low whistle. That would be something, wouldn't it? Her face drained of color. I shrugged again. Oh well. I guess I'll let them decide. Her rapid blinking told me everything I needed to know. I had her. Because Emily never truly cared about me. She never cared about our marriage. But her image? Her reputation? That was her world. And now it was in my hands. She looked down, fingers tightening around the hem of her sweatshirt, her mind racing to find a way out. But there wasn't one. Not this time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she exhaled sharply and turned toward the door. Where are you going? I asked, smirking. She didn't look back. To sign the damn papers. And just like that, I won. Emily disappeared into her office, slamming the door behind her. From the other side, I could hear the rustling of papers, the rhythmic tapping of a pen against her desk. She was stalling, trying to grasp how she had lost control. I let her. Leaning back in my chair, I finished the last sip of my coffee, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight that had pressed down on me, the uncertainty, the doubts had vanished. She was finally seeing the truth I had known since last night. This was over. And there was nothing she could do to change that. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. Finally, the door creaked open and Emily stepped out. In her hands, she held the divorce papers, her knuckles pale from gripping them too tightly. I didn't say a word as she walked over to the kitchen island and slid the documents toward me. The signature was there, neat, deliberate. A signature of surrender. I picked up the papers, scanning them briefly for any last-minute attempts at manipulation. But no, everything was in order. Emily stood across from me, arms folded, watching. Expecting something. I met her gaze. What? She exhaled sharply. That's it. I smirked. What, were you expecting a hug? Her eyes flashed. Screw you. I laughed. There she is. Shaking her head. She took a step back, as if the very sight of me was unbearable. But before leaving, she turned. And for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar in her expression. Regret. Not because she was sorry. Not because she hurt me. But because she lost. Her voice was quieter this time. You really think you're better off without me? I didn't hesitate. I know I am. She studied me, searching for any sign of hesitation, any doubt. But there was nothing left to find. After a moment, she gave a slow, bitter nod. Fine. She grabbed her keys from the counter, picked up her phone, and walked out without another word. A minute later, I heard her car start, and then she was gone. For the first time in a decade, I felt free. The silence in the house was unlike anything I had ever known. No footsteps moving upstairs. No passive-aggressive sighs. No late-night phone notifications from people I was never supposed to know about. Just peace. I leaned against the counter, my eyes falling to the divorce papers. Her signature was there, clear and final. But her last question still lingered in the air. You really think you're better off without me? I wasn't just thinking it. I knew it. I gathered the papers and placed them neatly back into the envelope. Tomorrow I take them to my lawyer. It was done. Or so I thought. I had barely settled onto the couch when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me knew I should answer. I swiped the screen. A brief pause. Then, "It's Jason." I shut my eyes and exhaled slowly through my nose. The audacity of Jason calling me now was almost laughable. "I know I probably shouldn't be calling," he said hurriedly. "But you need to hear this." I stayed silent, waiting. Jason let out a heavy sigh before continuing. "Emily just called me." I frowned. "And why exactly do I care?" "She's going after everything." That caught my attention. I sat up, my grip tightening on the phone. "What?" Jason hesitated before lowering his voice. "She's furious. Says you humiliated her, made her look weak. Now she's talking about shutting you out completely." A quiet, humorless laugh escaped me as I shook my head. "Of course she is. She's claiming you manipulated her into signing." "That she wasn't thinking clearly," Jason added. My hold on the phone grew tense. "She wasn't thinking clearly?" My voice hardened. "She cheated on me. She laughed in my face when I gave her an anniversary gift. She threw away everything we had for some meaningless fling." Jason cut me off, his tone firm. "I'm not here to argue, man. I'm warning you. She's planning to drag this out. She wants the house, the money, everything. And she's determined to make you regret this." Dragging a hand down my face, I let out a long breath. I should have seen this coming. Emily never loses quietly. Jason sighed. "Look, I don't expect you to trust me, and I know I don't deserve it. But I'm telling you, she's coming for you." I remained silent for a beat before finally responding. "Let her." Jason sounded uncertain. "What?" A smirk tugged at my lips, void of any amusement. "Let her." Emily thought she could turn this into a battle? She had no idea who she was up against. She believed she could rewrite history, twist herself into the victim, and make me pay for her choices. But what she didn't realize was that I had anticipated this from the moment I first saw that incriminating message on her phone. I had gathered everything: screenshots, bank statements, photos, timestamps of her hotel visits. A meticulously compiled file from the private investigator I had hired weeks ago, long before she even suspected I knew. She could try to take me down, but I had already won. Jason let out a slow breath. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to give you a heads up. You deserve that much." I chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's almost touching, Jason. Almost makes me forget you were sleeping with my wife." There was a pause. Then, finally a quiet, resigned, "Yeah, I deserve that." I nearly laughed. He sounded miserable. I doubted Emily had even mentioned him when she stormed out earlier. He had probably been waiting by his phone, expecting a message that never came. He was nothing more than a distraction to her, a temporary amusement. And now that she was done, he was just another casualty. "Thanks for the warning," I said evenly. "But don't call me again." Before he could reply, I ended the call. Then I got to work. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, sipping coffee as he reviewed the evidence. Dan, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney, flipped through the neatly organized folder, letting out a low whistle. "This is thorough," he remarked. I shrugged. "I like to be prepared." Leaning back in his chair, Dan tapped a finger against the folder. "If she tries to contest the divorce, this puts us in a very strong position. No judge is going to take her side with this much evidence. She was the one cheating. She was the one misusing marital funds for her affair." He smirked. "Honestly, she'd be foolish to fight this." I let out a dry chuckle. "Well, she is foolish, but she's also stubborn." Dan nodded knowingly. "Then we'll be ready." I finished my coffee, rose from my chair, and shook his hand. "File everything today." He grinned. "Consider it done." That night, Emily finally called. I let the phone ring. A moment later, a text popped up. "Emily, we need to talk. Now." I smiled and set my phone down without responding. She no longer had the right to demand my time. I had already moved on. The next morning, something unfamiliar settled over me. Peace. No tension in my chest, no lingering doubts, no paranoia. Just silence. Emily hadn't shown up at the house. She hadn't called again. The divorce papers were officially filed. There was nothing left for her to say. She lost. I got up, took a shower, and made myself breakfast. Simple eggs and toast, but it tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sitting across from someone who secretly despised me. Halfway through my coffee, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. I nearly ignored it. Almost. But then I read it. Emily, I hope you're happy. You ruined everything. A deep, genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest. I ruined everything? I set my phone down, shaking my head. She still didn't understand. She had destroyed our marriage the moment she let another man into her life. The instant her eyes met mine and she laughed at the gift I had given her, everything changed. In that moment, she discarded a decade of love and devotion as if it meant nothing. But I didn't let her walk away unscathed. No, I made sure of that. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt something unexpected: happiness. A pure, unshackled joy that I hadn't known in years. For so long I had been running after her approval, desperate for even the smallest sign of affection. I had exhausted myself trying to mend something that had been shattered beyond repair. But now? I was free. Completely, undeniably free. Emily could wallow in her resentment, twisting the story however she pleased. She could paint herself as the victim if that's what helped her sleep at night. But none of it held any weight anymore. Because I had reclaimed my life and not a single second of it would be wasted on her again.